Published in print in 1971 by American author William Peter Blatty and adapted for film in 1973, The Exorcist represents a benchmark in American entertainment. Audiences of the film were left horrified, disgusted, and entertained by the grotesque Catholic horror story that crafted a narrative about a 12-year-old named Reagan McNiel's helpless descent into the throes of demonic possession and the brave priests that rallied for her cure. Although the film stands out as a more significant cultural moment than the novel for at least Americans, it is a near identical adaptation of Blatty's book, in which the author sought to perfect the plot of the 1968 horror film called Rosemary's Baby. Voices in the contemporary culture decried the film and its shocking scenes of blasphemy, and many cities and counties actually banned the film altogether. American states and other countries around the world banned the film. The book currently sits at a high rating of 4.2 stars out of 5 on Goodreads, a rating that was accumulated from over 230,000 ratings. Readers follow the story of a young girl supposedly possessed by the demon Pazuzu and her mother's desperate attempt to find a cure for her strange illness. Reagan's mother, Chris McNiel, is a famous actress who currently lives near Georgetown University and is shooting a film there. She finds herself begging the local Catholic priest for an exorcism, even though she herself is an atheist. She enlists the help of a Jesuit priest and psychiatrist named Father Karras, who is himself experiencing a crisis of belief following the death of his mother. Reagan's illness corresponds with blasphemous desecrations at a nearby church, and readers watch as her body and mind begin to manifest injury and abuse at the hands of her supposed demon. Reagan manifests supernatural abilities, including telekinesis, super strength, and fluency in dead languages, and she has the unsettling perception of the inner thoughts of the people who surround her. Multiple people apparently die at her hands, including Chris's acting peer and the elder of the two priests who perform the actual exorcism. Father Karras is tortured by the process as he's determined to believe that Reagan's case is not one of exorcism, but some other psychiatric condition. At the climax of the novel, Father Karras invites the demon into his own body, after which he throws himself from the second-story window and dies on the ground. In the final moments of his life, Father Karras is at peace with God, and Reagan is freed from the demon. Author William Peter Blatty, he earned his bachelor's degree in English and a master's degree from Georgetown University, which is the same setting of the book, and supposedly based many of his characters in the story on real-life people. He wrote the screenplay for the movie himself and would publish a sequel called Legion several years later in 1983. He was also publicly a very faithful Catholic to the point of filing an official complaint against Georgetown University in 2012 for inviting pro-abortion speakers to the campus. The prose of this book is very approachable. I myself listened to the audiobook, and when you're listening to an audiobook, literary devices are a little bit harder to spot, but the 2011 edition, which is the one I listened to, is read by William Peter Blatty himself, and it grants an authentic reading literally as the author himself intended. The book has a very stifling mood, and the walls feel like they are constantly closing in. There are scenes in the book that occur outside of Reagan's bedroom, but every moment, even outside, feels suffocating. Even the campus of Georgetown feels like a prison from which the characters cannot escape. Readers are informed that the evil occupying Reagan's body is also somehow causing problems elsewhere, while also confined to her body, and that generates this feeling of hopelessness, and it pushes the reader to wonder if the demon is actually omnipresent, or at least conducting wickedness in multiple places at once. Because of this, the world of the story feels small and imprisoning. The blasphemy found in this book is also very shocking. And even though the author, Mr. Blatty himself, was Catholic, I was very surprised to learn this because I don't know of any practicing Catholic who would put to paper the words that come out of Reagan's mouth. Some of those are mentioned in the movie, but in the book, it's just as shocking. And even some of the actions described in the book are so shocking to people of faith that I'm honestly not surprised that American culture rejected the movie, even though it was in the 70s. There is a clear theme, at least to me, and it's centered on Father Karras's faltering faith. This is ironic, of course, because he is a priest, and Reagan's mother, Chris, is his foil. Although an atheist, Chris expresses more hope in the exorcism than Father Karras, who actually expects the exorcism to be unsuccessful and potentially harmful. The theme of parenthood is also present, as Reagan's biological father is not present for her struggle, but Father Karras is. And Chris watches helplessly as a parent's worst fears are realized. Her child is dying of a mysterious illness, and she is powerless to stop it. I also wonder if this book, when it was written in the 70s, is actually reflecting some of the thought processes about average Catholics towards the Jesuit organization in the 70s. Jesuits are an organization within the Catholic Church that have their own type of faith, and many consider them to be the more liberal, and some would even argue that they are less spiritual and more scientific than other Catholics. And so I wonder if Blatty is bringing that perception of Jesuits into this novel to explore that in a time in American history and in Catholic Church history in which that was at the forefront of many people's minds. The characters themselves feel like real humans, especially Chris McNiel and Detective Kinderman. I've not spoken too much of him, but Father Karras has the clearest arc, moving from loss of faith to a sacrificial belief. But he also, in many ways, unfortunately, feels very much like a book character. Priests and religious figures in horror and fantasy literature are often very caricatured as ironically wicked or drunk or perverted or faithless. I was immediately suspicious of Father Karras. And I know that Father James Martin, a Jesuit priest, has written on Hollywood's view of the Catholic Church and, in connection, popular culture's view of the Catholic Church, and that translates, I believe, into works of fiction like this in novels. But he talks about the fact that many people in pop culture have a divided view of the Catholic Church. On one hand, they view it as something that is archaic, something that is an obstacle to social progress, and yet on the other hand, it is always a priest or a nun or authorities from the Catholic Church that are the heroes in horror stories. And that is also the case here. But anti-Catholic characters and ironic depictions of priests are nothing new in literature. And of course, if you know anything about horror writing, I'm looking at you, Stephen King. At the time that it was written, the idea of a faithless priest may have been original, but at this point, it's really not surprising to me. However, I will say that what sets this character apart from historical anti-Catholic depictions of priests is, I believe, the author's intent. Blatty remained a staunch Catholic until his death, so I think one can safely assume that his treatment of Father Karras is more sympathetic to clergy than it is mean-spirited. Reagan herself is hardly a character, interestingly enough, although she's basically a plot device for the demon, which has a more developed character than she does. Once things really start escalating with the demon, the pacing of the story, it moves a little quicker, although the story I would consider is not one that moves quickly or slowly. And before I finish, I want to talk about a few tropes. The most obvious trope in this book is called maybe magic, maybe mundane, which I find to be one of my absolute least favorite tropes in literature. And that's when the author wants the reader to wonder if what is happening is because of magic or because of some naturalist explanation. I kind of find it to be insulting, especially in horror or fantasy, because I know that I'm reading horror. I know that I'm reading fantasy. So just commit to the supernatural explanation. The good news is that it is resolved pretty quickly in the book that the demon is definitely real. Two other horror works come to mind that I can think of that have this trope. One is a movie called The Exorcism of Emily Rose that came out in 2005 or 2006. And in the 1971 novel called Hell House by Richard Matheson, that also explores this idea of wanting the reader or the viewer to question if what they're seeing is actually spiritual or if it's some psychological condition. And interestingly enough about Hell House, that was published the same year as The Exorcist, and there are some similarities there, except one had a very famous film named after it, and it became a pop culture icon, whereas the other also had a movie named after it, and yet it has faded into obscurity. In conclusion, The Exorcist is pretty chilling at times, but the widespread use of the possession genre at this point has retroactively diminished the story's horror elements. What sets this novel apart is the character studies, a faltering Jesuit priest, a hopeful actress mother, a suspicious detective. Although in an ironic twist, Blatty has written a book that arguably repulses those who would be most interested in its subject matter, which are faithful Catholics. For these reasons and for those I mentioned in my review, I give The Exorcist 3 stars out of 5.